3 chapters, and we're done with book 1. And how long did that take?
I don't remember.
I don't
remember when we started.
We started almost 2 weeks ago, not quite, on a Wednesday. So that was 12 days ago. But we've only done it Wednesday, Thursday, 6 days. So this is our 7th day doing it. How cool is that?
Yeah. Well, to be fair, though, I mean, this is a book that you can easily sit down and read in like a day. You know, it's a pretty short book.
Well, not every. That's okay. That's just us who are addicted to Harry Potter. Okay. I know what you mean, though. But anyways, welcome back again. As you know, we're locked in.
We are locked in, physically locked into this closet. Emotionally, spiritually. No, not spiritually.
Wow.
Emotionally locked into the book. You know.
No, seriously though, Harry is making waves in the wizarding world. My goodness, help me out here, Jacob.
Yeah.
I lost it there is all. But anyways, Jacob, remind me what chapter, because my brain is blanking.
We are on chapter 11.
11.
That's going to be page 180 for those who are following along at home. So far, do you want to give a little summary as to what has happened in the book so far?
So much has happened.
Let's see.
So, since Harry coming to Hogwarts, he found out he is, in fact, a Gryffindor, and he kind of put in a good word with the sorting hat to make it happen. And then Harry did his class, and that was really interesting. But let's not forget when he first picked up a broomstick and then saved Neville's... Remember-all, this little sphere, like, wizardy Remember-all. Then, in Potions class after, Snape was kind of... He's pretty mean, I'll be honest, he was brutal. I hope I'm not that mean as a teacher to some of you. And then they defeated a troll. Ron, Hermione, Harry. So where does that leave us, Jacob?
Well, that leaves us with the Gryffindors receiving 5 points after some were added. Now they've bonded a friendship with Hermione.
Wait, I believe 5 points were taken away and they got 10. 5 for each.
So 5 total.
Oh, you're right. This is why I'm not a math teacher. This is why. Oh, goodness.
Yeah, so, but yeah, so that's kind of where the last chapter ended off. We are about to embark on some pretty good and exciting things, so I'm looking forward to that. I feel like I had one other thing I wanted to add, but what that was is now escaping me. I feel like it would just be awkward to just sit here and wait for that to come back.
I just don't say anything, just let you think. For like 5 minutes, that's all this is.
And we're reading, and then I figure it out. We can't do that, you know what I'm saying? So
right, awesome.
We'll move on from whatever thought that was. It was something semi-important.
It'll come back. This is 4 chapters. It'll eventually go. Anyways, we're on chapter 11, and Jacob memorized it, actually, so go ahead.
Chapter 11, Quidditch.
Hey, there we go. Okay, we're going to stop there.
Okay.
But anyways, chapter 11, Quidditch. Our boy Harry is, oh my goodness, the boy who lived. Here we go. As they entered November, the weather turned very cold. The mountains around the school became icy gray and the lake like chilled steel. Every morning the ground was covered in frost. Hagrid could be seen from the upstairs windows defrosting broomsticks on the Quidditch field, bundled up in a long moleskin overcoat, rabbit fur gloves, and enormous beaver skin boots. The Quidditch season had begun. On Saturday, Harry would be playing in his first match after weeks of training. Gryffindor versus Slytherin. If Gryffindor won, they would move up into second place in the house championship. Hardly anyone had seen Harry play because Wood had decided that, as their secret weapon, Harry should be kept well secret. But the news that he was playing Seeker had leaked out somehow, and Harry didn't know which was worse. People telling him he'd be brilliant, or people telling him they'd be running around underneath him holding a mattress. Dang. Yeah, good friends, though.
Yeah, absolutely. One note that also just pops out to me here, mentioning the house championship, I just this thought that came to my mind. The house championship plays such a big role in the first 2 books, and then after that is just like, it's present but just not a concern. I suppose that's just kind of
Wait, spoilers.
Yeah. as I
Well,
said.
not that big, honestly. That's just good insight. Sorry, so sorry.
As soon as I said that, we had all of our viewers leave. On that note, let's continue.
The millions of them all left at once. Millions.
Yeah.
Watch out, Ninja. It was really lucky that Harry now had Hermione as a friend. He didn't know how he'd gotten through all his homework without her, what with all the last-minute Quidditch practice Wood was making them do. She had also lent him the Quidditch Through the Ages, which turned out to be a very interesting read. Harry learned that there were 700 ways of committing a Quidditch foul, and that all of them had happened during a World Cup match in 1473, that seekers were usually the smallest and fastest, and that the most serious Quidditch accidents seemed to happen to them, that although people rarely died playing Quidditch, referees had been known to vanish and turn up months later in the Sahara Desert. Hermione had become a bit more relaxed about breaking rules since Harry and Ron had saved her from the mountain troll, and she was much nicer for it. The day before Harry's first Quidditch match, the three of them were out in the freezing courtyard during break, and she had conjured them up a bright blue fire that could be carried around in a jam jar. They were standing with their backs to it, getting warm, when Snape crossed the yard. Harry noticed at once that Snape was limping. Harry, Ron, and Hermione moved closer to block the fire from view. They were sure it wouldn't be allowed. Unfortunately, something about their guilty faces caught Snape's eye. He limped over. He hadn't seen the fire, but he seemed to be looking for a reason to tell them off anyway.
What's that you've got there, Potter?
It was Quidditch Through the Ages. Harry showed him.
Library books are not to be taken outside the school,
said Snape.
Give it to me. 5 points from Gryffindor.
He's just made that rule up, Harry muttered angrily as Snape limped away. Wonder what's wrong with his leg. Don't know, but I hope it's really hurting him, said Ron bitterly. The Gryffindor common room was very noisy that evening. Harry, Ron, and Hermione sat together next to a window. Hermione was checking Harry and Ron's charms homework for them. She would never let them copy "How will you learn?" But by asking her to read it through, they got the right answers anyway. Harry felt restless. He wanted Quidditch Through the Ages back to take his mind off his nerves about tomorrow. Why should he be afraid of Snape? Getting up, he told Ron and Hermione he was going to ask Snape if he could have it. Better, let's do this. 1, 2, 3.
Better you than me,
they said together. Boom, got it. But Harry had an idea that Snape wouldn't refuse if there were other teachers listening. He made his way down to the staff room and knocked. There was no answer. He knocked again. Nothing. Perhaps Snape had left the book in there. It was worth a try. He pushed the door ajar and peered inside, and a horrible scene met his eyes. Snape and Filch were inside alone. Snape was holding his robes above his knees. One of his legs was bloody and mangled. Filch was handing Snape bandages.
Blasted thing.
Snape was saying.
How are you supposed to keep your eyes on all 3 heads at once?
Harry tried to shut the door quietly.
Potter!
Snape's face was twisted with fury as he dropped his robes quickly to hide his leg. Harry gulped. I just wondered if I could have my book
Get
back.
out! Out!
Harry left before Snape could take any more points from Gryffindor. He sprinted back upstairs. Did you get it? Ron asked as Harry joined them. What's the matter? In a low whisper, Harry told them what he'd seen. You know what this means? He finished breathlessly. He tried to get back the dog at Halloween. That's where he was going when we saw him. He's after whatever it's guarding, and I bet my broomstick he let that troll in to make a diversion. Hermione's eyes were wide.
No, he wouldn't,
She said.
I know he's not very nice, but he wouldn't try and steal something Dumbledore was trying to keep safe.
Honestly, Hermione, you think all the teachers are saints or something? Snapped Ron. I'm with Harry. I wouldn't put anything past Snape. But what's he after? What's the dog guarding? The god guarding? This isn't Percy Jackson. Goodness, that's what we've been reading. Anyways, what's the dog guarding? Harry went to bed with his head buzzing with the same question. Neville was snoring loudly, but Harry couldn't sleep. He tried to empty his mind. He needed to sleep. He had to. He had his first Quidditch match in a few hours, but the expression on Snape's face when Harry had seen his leg wasn't easy to forget. The next morning dawned very bright and cold. The great hall was full of the delicious smell of fried sausages and the chatter of everyone looking forward to a good Quidditch match.
I don't know who this is.
No, that's Hermione. Go.
You've got to eat some breakfast.
I don't want anything.
Just a bit of toast.
I'm not hungry. Harry felt terrible. In an hour's time, he'd be walking onto the field.
Harry, you need your strength.
Said Seamus Finnegan.
If you noticed from last time, Stephen has now corrected his pronunciation.
I apologize, but I pronounce things correctly now. Please just keep reading. I'm struggling.
Seekers are always the ones who get clobbered by the other team.
Thanks, Seamus, said he.
Seamus, Stephen.
Seamus! Thanks, Seamus. It doesn't... there's a silent H. Thanks, Seamus. It's got to be a Scottish.
It's like Sean, spelled with S-E-A-N.
It is.
You know,
you're so right. I'm so wrong, said Harry, watching Seamus pile ketchup on his sausages. By 11 o'clock, the whole school seemed to be out in the stands around the Quidditch pitch. Many students had binoculars. The seats might be raised high in the air, but it was still difficult to see what was going on sometimes. Ron and Hermione joined Neville, Seamus... Seamus! Why can't... My brain doesn't want to read the silent H. Joined Neville, Seamus, and Dean the West Ham fan up in the top row. As a surprise for Harry, they had painted a large banner on one of the sheets. Scabbers had... It said, Potter for President. And Dean, who was good at drawing, had done a large Gryffindor lion underneath. Then Hermione had performed a tricky little charm so that the paint flashed different colors. Meanwhile, in the locker room, Harry and the rest of the team were changing into their scarlet Quidditch robes. Slytherin would be playing in green. Wood cleared his throat for silence.
Can we pause real quick? For those who were not here the other day, you are about to hear a brand new take on Oliver Wood. It is wild. Moving on.
Dudes, men, he said.
And women,
said Chaser Angelina Johnson. And women, Wood agreed. This is it.
The big one,
said Fred Weasley.
The one we've all been waiting for,
said George.
We know Oliver's speech by heart.
Fred told Harry.
We were on the team last year too.
Shut up, you two, said Wood. This is the best team Gryffindor's had in years. We're gonna win it. I know it. He glared at them all as if to say, right, it's time. Good luck, all of you. Harry followed. Righteous, it's time. Good luck, all of you.
There you go.
Harry followed Fred and George out of the locker room and hoping his knees weren't going to give away, walked under the cheers. Madam Hooch was refereeing. She stood in the middle of the field waiting for the two teams, her broom in hand.
Now I want a fair game. All of you,
she said, once they were all gathered around her. Harry noticed that she seemed to be speaking particularly to the Slytherin captain, Marcus Flint, a fifth year. Harry thought Flint looked as if he'd had some troll blood in him. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the fluttering banner high above, flashing, Potter for President, all over the crowd. His heart skipped. He felt braver.
Mount your brooms, please.
Harry clambered onto his Nimbus 2000. Hooch gave a loud blast on her silver whistle. 15 brooms rose up, high into the air. They were off.
And the quaffle is taken immediately by Angelina Johnson of Gryffindor. What an excellent chaser that girl is. Rather attractive, too. Jordan! Sorry, Professor.
The Weasley twins' friend, Lee Jordan, was doing the commentary for the match, closely watched by Professor McGonagall.
And she's really belting up there. I'm sorry. A neat pass to Alicia Spinnet. Woods, last year only reserve. Back to Johnson. No! Slytherins have taken the quaffle. Slytherin captain Marcus Flint gains quaffle. And off he goes. Flint flying like an eagle up there. He's going to... No! It's stopped by an excellent move by Gryffindor keeper Wood. And the Gryffindors take the quaffle. That's Chaser Katie Bell of Gryffindor there. Nice dive around Flint, up around the field, and ouch! That must have hurt. Hit her right in the back of the head by a bludger. Quaffle taken by Slytherin. And that's Adrian Pusey speeding off towards the goalpost, but he's blocked for a second bludger. This one sent by Fred or George Weasley. Can't tell which one. Nice play by the Gryffindor beater anyway. And Johnson's back with a quaffle. Clear head, a field ahead of her. Off she goes. She's really flying. Dodges a speeding bludger. The goalpost ahead. Come on, Angelina. Keep up, Blood. She dives. Misses. Gryffindor scores!
Gryffindor cheers filled the cold air with howls and moans from the Slytherins.
Budge up there, move along.
Hagrid! Ron and Hermione squeezed together to give Hagrid enough space to join them.
Been watching from me hut,
said Hagrid, patting a large pair of binoculars around his neck.
But it isn't the same as being in the crowd. No sign of the snitch yet?
Nope, said Ron. I said it almost like Harry. Harry hasn't had much to do yet.
Keep out of trouble, that's something,
said Hagrid, raising his binoculars and peering skyward at the speck that was Harry. Way above them, Harry was gliding over the game, squinting about for some sign of the snitch. This was part of his and Wood's game plan. Keep out of the way until you catch sight of the snitch, Wood had said. We don't want you attacked before we have to be. When Angelina had scored, Harry had done a couple of loop-the-loops, I call them loopy-loops, to let off his feelings. Now he was back to staring around for the snitch. Once he caught sight of a flash of gold, but it was just a reflection from one of the Weasleys' wristwatches, and once a bludger decided to come pelting his way, more like a cannonball than anything. But Harry dodged it, and Fred Weasley came chasing after it.
All right there, Harry,
he had time to yell, as he beat the bludger furiously toward Marcus Flint.
Slytherin in possession.
Lee Jordan was saying.
Chaser Pusey ducks 2 bludgers, 2 Weasleys, and Chaser Bell speeds towards the... Wait a moment, was that the snitch?
A murmur ran through the crowd as Adrian Pusey dropped the quaffle, too busy looking over his shoulder at the flash of gold that had passed his left ear. Harry saw it. In a great rush of excitement, he dived downward after the streak of gold. Slytherin seeker Terrence Higgs had seen it too. Neck and neck, the snitch. All the chasers seemed to have forgotten what they were supposed to be doing as they hung in midair to watch. Harry was faster than Higgs. He could see the little round ball, wings fluttering, darting up ahead. He put on an extra spurt of speed. Wham! A roar of rage echoed from the Gryffindors below. Marcus Flint had blocked Harry on purpose, and Harry's broom spun off, of course, Harry holding on for dear life.
Foul!
Screamed the Gryffindors. Madam Hooch spoke angrily to Flint and then ordered a free shot at the goalpost for Gryffindor. But in all the confusion, of course, the golden snitch had disappeared from sight again. Down in the stands, Dean Thomas was yelling,
Do you want to be Dean?
Yeah. Send him off, ref! Red... What are you talking about, Dean? Said Ron. Red card! Said Dean furiously. In soccer, you get shown the red card, and you're out of the game. But this isn't soccer, Dean, Ron reminded him. Hagrid, however, was on Dean's side.
They ought to change the rules. Flint could have knocked Harry out of the air.
Lee Jordan was finding it difficult not to take sides.
So, after that obvious and disgusting bit of cheating, Jordan!
Growled Professor McGonagall.
I mean, after what was an open and revolting foul, Jordan, I'm warning you. All right. Flint nearly kills the Gryffindor Seeker, which could have happened to anyone, I'm sure, so a penalty to Gryffindor taken by Spinnet, who puts it away, no trouble, and we continue to play. Gryffindor in possession.
It was as Harry dodged another bludger, which went spinning dangerously past his head, that it happened. His broom gave a sudden, frightening lurch. For a split second, he thought he was going to fall. He gripped the broom tightly with both his hands and knees. He'd never felt anything like that. It happened again. It was as though the broom was trying to buck him off. 2000s did not suddenly decide to buck their riders off. Harry tried to turn back toward the Gryffindor goalpost. He had half a mind to ask Wood to call timeout, and then he realized that his broom was completely out of his control. He couldn't turn it. He couldn't direct it at all. It was zigzagging through the air and every now and then making violent, swishing movements that almost unseated him. Lee was still commentating.
Slytherin in possession, Flint with a quaffle, passes Spinnet, passes Bell, hit hard in the face by a bludger. Hope it broke his nose. Only joking, Professor! Slytherin
The Slytherins were cheering. No one seemed to have noticed that Harry's broom was behaving strangely. It was carrying him slowly higher, away from the game, jerking and twitching as it went.
Dunno what Harry thinks he's doing.
Hagrid mumbled. He stared through his binoculars.
If I didn't know better, I'd say he lost control of his broom. But he can't have.
Suddenly, people were pointing up at Harry all over the stands. His broom had started to roll over and over, with him only just managing to hold on. Then the whole crowd gasped. Harry's broom had given a wild jerk, and Harry swung off it. He was now dangling from it, holding on with only one hand.
Did something happen when Flint blocked him?
Seamus whispered.
Can't have.
Hagrid said, his voice shaking.
Can't nothing interfere with the broomstick except powerful dark magic. No kid could do that to Nimbus 2000.
At these words, Hermione seized Hagrid's binoculars, but instead of looking up at Harry, she started looking frantically at the crowd. "What are you doing?" moaned Ron, gray-faced.
I knew it!
Hermione gasped.
Snape, look!
Ron grabbed the binoculars. Snape was in the middle of the stands opposite them. He had his eyes fixed on Harry's and was muttering nonstop under his breath.
He's doing something. Jinxing the broom,
said Hermione. "What should we do?"
Leave it to me.
Before Ron could say another word, Hermione had disappeared. Ron turned the binoculars back on Harry. His broom was vibrating so hard it was almost impossible for him to hang on as much longer. The whole crowd was on its feet, terrified, as the Weasleys flew up to try and pull Harry safely onto one of their brooms, but it was no good. Every time they got near him, the broom would jump higher still. They dropped lower and circled beneath him, obviously hoping to catch him if he fell. Marcus Flint seized the quaffle and scored 5 times without anyone noticing. "Come on, Hermione," Ron muttered desperately. Hermione had fought her way across the stand where Snape stood, and was now racing along the row behind him. She didn't even stop to say sorry as she knocked Professor Quirrell headfast into the row in front. Reaching Snape, she crouched down, pulled out her wand, and whispered a few well-chosen words. Bright blue flame shot from her wand onto the hem of Snape's robes. It took perhaps 30 seconds for Snape to realize that he was on fire. That'd be hard. A whole 30 seconds of being on fire and just realizing it? That dude is focused.
I hate it when that happens.
Classic. Fire. A sudden yelp told her that she had done her job. Scooping the fire off him into a little jar in her pocket, she scrambled back along the row. Snape would never know what had happened. It was enough. Up in the air, Harry was suddenly able to clamber back onto his broom. "Neville, you can look," Ron said. Neville had been sobbing into Hagrid's jacket for the last 5 minutes. Classic Neville. Harry was speeding toward the ground when the crowd saw him clap his hand to his mouth as though he was about to be sick. He hit the field on all fours, coughed, and something gold fell into his hand. "I've got the snitch!" he shouted, waving it above his head, and the game ended in complete confusion.
They didn't catch it. It nearly swallowed it.
Flint was still howling 20 minutes later, but it made no difference. Harry hadn't broken any rules, and Lee Jordan was still happily shouting the results. Gryffindor had won by 170 points to 60. Harry heard none of this, though. He was being made a cup of strong tea back in Hagrid's hut, with Ron and Hermione. "It was Snape," Ron was explaining. "Hermione and I saw him. He was cursing your broomstick, muttering. He wouldn't take his eyes off you."
Rubbish,
said Hagrid, who hadn't heard a word of what had gone on next to him in the stands.
Why would Snape do something like that?
Ron and Hermione looked at one another, wondering what to tell him. Harry decided on the truth. "I found out something about him," he told Hagrid. "He tried to get past that 3-headed dog on Halloween. It bit him. We think he was trying to steal whatever it's guarding." Hagrid dropped the teapot.
How do you know about Fluffy?
He said. "Fluffy?"
Yeah, he's mine. Bought him off a Greek chappie I met in the pub last year. Lent him to Dumbledore to guard the,
Yes, said Harry eagerly.
No, don't ask me anymore.
Roughly.
That's top secret, that is.
"But Snape's trying to steal it,"
Rubbish.
said Hagrid again.
Snape's a teacher. He's sword.
So why did he just try and kill Harry?
cried Hermione. The afternoon's events certainly seem to have changed your mind about Snape.
I know jinx when I see one, Hagrid. I've read all about them. You've got to keep eye contact, and Snape wasn't blinking at all. I saw him.
I'm telling you, you're wrong.
Said Hagrid hotly.
I don't know why Harry's broomstick was acting like that, but Snape wouldn't be trying to kill a student. Now listen to me, all three of you. Don't go meddling in things that don't concern you. It's dangerous, that is. You forget about that dog and what's its guarding. That's between Professor Dumbledore and Nicholas Flamel.
Aha! Said Harry. So there's someone called Nicholas Flamel involved, is there? Hagrid looked furious with himself. Man, I love that Quidditch chapter so much. It's so great.
Yeah, good clean fun right there. I don't care who you are. Shout out to Jeremy Carlson.
Is that his quote?
Yeah.
Wow.
Anyway.
Love that guy. Jeremy's pretty cool.
Yeah. Moving on, chapter 12.
Let's do it.
Chapter 12, The Mirror of Earset. Christmas was coming. One morning in mid-December, Hogwarts woke to find itself covered in several feet of snow. Excuse me. The lake froze solid, and the Weasley twins were punished for bewitching several snowballs that followed Quirrell around, bouncing off the back of his turban. The few owls that managed to battle their way through the deliver mail had been nursed back to health by Hagrid before they could fly off again. No one waited for the holidays to start. While the Gryffindor common room and the Great Hall had roaring fires, the drafty corridors became icy, and a bitter wind rattled the windows in the classrooms. Worst of all were Professor Snape's classes down in the dungeons, where their breath rose in a mist before them, and they kept as close as possible to their hot cauldrons. "I do feel sorry," said Draco Malfoy one day in potions class, "for all those people who have to stay at Hogwarts for Christmas because they're not wanted at home." He was looking over at Harry as he spoke. Crabbe and Goyle chuckled. Harry, who was measuring out a line of lionfish, ignored them. Malfoy had been even more unpleasant than usual since the Quidditch match. Disgusted Burns had lost, he had tried to get everyone laughing at a wide-mouthed tree frog. How a wide-mouthed tree frog would be replacing Harry as Secret next. Then he realized that nobody found this funny, because they were all too impressed at the way that Harry had managed to stay on his bucking broomstick. So Malfoy, jealous and angry, had gone back to taunting Harry about having no proper family. It was true that Harry wasn't going back to Privet Drive for Christmas. Professor McGonagall had come around the week before, making a list of students who would be staying for the holidays, and Harry signed up at once. He didn't feel sorry for himself at all. This would probably be the best Christmas he'd ever had. Ron and his brothers were staying too, because Mr. and Mrs. Weasley were going to Romania to see Charlie. When they left the dungeon at the end of potions class, they found a large fir tree blocking the corridor ahead. Two enormous feet sticking out of the bottom, and a loud puffing sound told them that Hagrid was behind it.
"Hi, Hagrid. Want any help?"
Ron asked, sticking his head through the branches.
Nah, I'm alright. Thanks, Ron.
"Would you mind moving that out of the way?" came Malfoy's cold drawl from behind them. "Are you trying to earn some extra money, Weasley? Hoping to be gamekeeper yourself when you leave Hogwarts, I suppose. That hut that Hagrid has must be a palace compared to what your family's used to." Ron dived at Malfoy just as Snape came up the stairs.
Weasley!
Ron let go of Malfoy's front robes.
"He was provoked, Professor Snape,"
said Hagrid, sticking his huge hairy face out from behind the tree.
"Malfoy was insulting his family." "Be that as it may, it is against Hogwarts rules to fight Hagrid,"
said Snape silkily.
5 points from Gryffindor, Weasley, and be grateful it isn't more. Move along, all of you.
Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle pushed through past the tree, scattering needles everywhere and smirking.
"I'll get him,"
said Ron, grinding his teeth at Malfoy's back.
"One of these days, I'll get him. I hate them both,
said Harry.
Malfoy and Snape."
"Come on, cheer up. It's nearly Christmas,"
said Hagrid.
Tell you what, come with me and see the Great Hall. Looks like a treat.
So the three of them followed Hagrid and his tree off to the Great Hall, where Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick were busy with the Christmas decorations. Oh, Hagrid, put it in the far corner, would you? The hall looked spectacular. Festoons of holly and mistletoe hung all around the walls, and no less than 12 towering Christmas trees stood around the room, some sparkling with tiny icicles, some glittering with hundreds of candles.
How many days you got left till your holidays?
Hagrid asked. Just one, said Hermione. And that reminds me, Harry, Ron, we've got about an hour before lunch. We should go to the library.
Oh yeah, you're right,
said Ron, tearing his eyes away from Professor Flitwick, who had golden bubbles blossoming out of his wand that was trailing them over the branches of the new tree.
The library,
said Hagrid, following them out of the hall.
Just before the holidays. Been keen, aren't you?
Oh, we're not working.
Harry told him brightly.
Ever since you mentioned Nicholas Flamel, we've been trying to find out who he is.
Nicholas Flamel.
Nicholas Flamel, we've been trying to find out who he is. Oh, Harry, don't mispronounce it.
You what?
Hagrid looked shocked.
Listen here, I told you to drop it. It's nothing to you with that dog's garden.
You just want to know what... you just want to know... That's why it was messing me up. We just want to know who Nicholas Flamel is. That's all, said Hermione.
Unless you'd like to tell us and save us the trouble?
Harry added.
We must have been through hundreds of books already and we can't find him anywhere. Just give us a hint. I know we've read his name somewhere.
I'm not saying nothing,
said Hagrid flatly.
Just have to find it out for ourselves then,
said Ron. And they left Hagrid looking disgruntled and hurried off to the library. They had indeed been searching books for Flamel's name ever since Hagrid had let it slip. But how else were they going to find out what Snape was trying to steal? The trouble was, it was very hard to know where to begin. Not knowing what Flamel might have done to get himself into a book. He wasn't in great wizards of the 20th century, or notable magical names of our time. He was missing, too, an important modern magical discoveries, and a study of recent developments in wizardry. And then, of course, there were the sheer size of the library. Tens of thousands of books, thousands of shelves, hundreds of narrow rows. Hermione took out a list of subjects and titles that she had decided to search, while Ron strode off down the row of books and started pulling them off shelves at random. Harry wandered over to the restricted section. He had been wondering for a while if Flamel wasn't somewhere in there. Unfortunately, he needed a specially assigned note from a teacher to look up one of the restricted books, and he knew that he'd never get one. These were the books containing magic that was never taught in Hogwarts, and only read by older students studying for advanced defense against the dark arts.
What are you looking for, boy?
Nothing,
said Harry. Madame Pince, the librarian, brandished out a feather and duster at him.
You'd better get out there. Go on now.
Wishing he'd been a bit quicker at thinking up some story, Harry left the library. He, Ron, and Hermione had already agreed that they'd not ask Madame Pince where they could find a Flamel. They were sure that she'd be able to tell them, but they couldn't risk Snape hearing what they were up to. Harry waited outside the corridor to see if the other two had found out anything, but he wasn't very hopeful. They had been looking for 2 weeks after all, but as they only had odd moments between lessons, it wasn't surprising that they hadn't found anything. What they really needed was a long stretch without Madame Pince breathing down their necks. 5 minutes later, Ron and Hermione joined him, shaking their heads, and they went off to lunch. You will keep looking when I'm away, won't you? Said Hermione. And send me an owl if you find anything.
And you could ask your parents if they know who Flamel is,
said Ron.
It'd be safe to ask them.
Very safe, as they're both dentists, said Hermione. Over the holidays, once the holidays had started, Ron and Harry were having too good of a time to think much about Flamel. They had the dormitory to themselves. and the common room was far emptier than usual, so they were able to get good armchairs by the fire. They sat by the hour eating anything they could spare on a toasting fork. Bread, English muffins, marshmallows, and plotting ways of getting Malfoy expelled, which were fun to talk about, even if they wouldn't work. Ron also started teaching Harry wizard's chess. It was exactly like Muggle chess, except for that the figures were alive, which made it a lot more like directing troops in battle. Ron's set was very old and battered. Like everything else he owned, it had once belonged to someone else in his family, in this case his grandfather. However, old chessmen weren't a drawback at all. Ron knew them so well that he never had trouble getting them to do what he wanted. Harry played with the chessman Seamus Finnegan had lent him, and they didn't trust him at all. He wasn't a very good player yet, and they kept shouting different bits of advice at him, which was confusing.
Don't send me there! Can't you see his knight? Send him! We can afford to lose him!
On Christmas Eve, Harry went to bed, looking forward to the next day for the food and the fun, but not expecting any presents at all. When he woke early in the morning, however, the first thing he saw was a small pile of packages at the foot of his bed.
Merry Christmas.
Said Ron sleepily as Harry scrambled out of the bed and to pull on his bathrobe.
You too.
Said Harry.
Will you look at this? I've got some... What did you expect? Turnips?
Said Ron, turning to his own pile, which was a lot bigger than Harry's.
Good Ron.
Harry picked up the top parcel. It was wrapped in a thick brown paper and scrawled across. It was to Harry from Hagrid. Inside was a roughly cut wooden flute. Hagrid had obviously whittled it himself. Harry blew it. It sounded a bit like an owl. A second later, a very small parcel contained a note. We received your message and enclosed your Christmas present. From Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia. Taped to the note was a 50-cent piece.
Pence. He said cents.
Oh, 50 pence. Yeah.
That's friendly.
Said Harry. Ron was fascinated by the 50 pence.
Weird.
He said.
What a shape. This is money? You can keep it.
Said Harry, laughing at how pleased Ron was.
Hagrid and my aunt and uncle. So who said these? I think I know who that one's from.
Said Ron, turning a bit pink and pointing to the very lumpy parcel.
My mom. I told her you didn't expect any presents and... Oh no.
He groaned.
She's made you a Weasley sweater.
Harry had torn open the parcel to find a thick hand-knitted sweater in emerald green and a large box of homemade fudge.
Every year, she makes us a sweater.
Said Ron, unwrapping his own.
And mine's always maroon. That's really nice of her.
Said Harry, trying the fudge, which was very tasty. His next present also contained candy, a large box of chocolate frogs from Hermione. It's kind of impressive that 11-year-olds get each other presents. I mean, like, when I was 11, my presents that I got for friends and family and stuff were always bought by my parents.
I wonder if it's, like, also a British thing. Like maybe presents are a big deal in their culture. I wonder. Maybe that's why she... Or it's just a Hogwarts thing. It's Hogwarts culture.
Yeah, Hogwarts culture. Hashtag Hogwarts culture.
We'll leave it at that.
This only left one parcel. Harry picked it up and felt it. It was very light. He unwrapped it. Something fluid and silvery gray went slithering to the floor where it lay in the gleaming folds. Ron gasped.
I've heard of those.
He said in a hushed voice, dropping his box of every flavor beans that he had gotten from Hermione.
If that's what I think it is, they're really rare and really valuable. What is it?
Harry picked the shining silvery cloth from the floor. It was strange to touch, like water woven into material.
It's an invisibility cloak,
said Ron, a look of awe on his face.
I'm sure it is. Try it on.
Harry threw the cloak around his shoulders, and Ron gave a yell.
It is! Look down!
Harry looked down at his feet, but they were gone. He dashed to the mirror. Sure enough, his reflection looked back at him, just as his head suspended in midair. His body completely invisible. He pulled the cloak over his head, and his reflection vanished completely.
There's a note,
said Ron suddenly.
A note fell out of it.
Harry pulled off the cloak and seized the letter. Written in narrow, loopy writing that he'd never seen before were the following words. Your father left this in my possession before he died. It is time that it was returned to you. Use it well. A very Merry Christmas to you. There was no signature. Harry stared at the note. Ron was admiring the cloak.
I'd give anything for one of those.
He said.
Anything. What's the matter?
Said Harry. Oh, sorry.
What's the matter? Nothing.
Said Harry. There we go. He felt very strange. Who had sent him the cloak? Had it really once belonged to his father? Before he could say anything, or think anything else, the dormitory door was flung open by Fred and George Weasley. Harry stuffed the cloak quickly out of sight. He didn't feel like sharing this with anyone yet. Merry Christmas! Hey, look! Harry's got a Weasley sweater too! Fred and George were also wearing blue sweaters, one with a large F on it and the other with a G. Harry's better than ours, though, said Fred, holding up Harry's sweater. She obviously makes more of an effort if you're not family. Why aren't you wearing yours, Ronnie? George demanded. Come on, get it on. They're lovely and warm.
I hate maroon.
Ron moaned half-heartedly as he pulled it over his head. You haven't got a letter on yours, George observed. I suppose she thinks you don't forget your name. But we're not stupid. We know we're credited for it. That's good.
Snaps.
What's all this noise? Percy Weasley stuck his head through the door, approving. He'd clearly gotten halfway through unwrapping his presents too, carried a lumpy sweater over his arms, and Fred seized it. P for prefect, get it up. Come on, we're all wearing ours. Even Harry got one. I don't want, said Percy thickly, but the twins forced their sweater over his head, knocking his glasses askew. And you're not sitting with the prefects today either, said George. Christmas is a time for family. The frog marched Percy from the room, his arms pinned by the side to the side by his sweater. Harry had never in all his life had such a Christmas dinner. 100 fat roast turkeys, mountains of roast and boiled potatoes, platters of chipotles, turins of buttered peas, silver boats of thick, rich gravy in cranberry sauce, and stacks of wizard's crackers every few feet along the table. They were fantastic party favors, were nothing like the feeble muggle ones the Dursleys usually bought, with their little plastic toys and their flimsy paper hats inside. Harry pulled the wizard cracker with Fred, and it didn't just bang. It went off with a blast like a cannon that engulfed them all in a cloud of blue smoke, while from the inside exploded a rear admiral's hat and several live white mice. Up at the high table, Dumbledore had swapped his pointed wizard's hat for a flowered bonnet and was chuckling merrily at a joke that Professor Flitwick had read him. Flaming Christmas puddings followed the turkey. Percy nearly broke his teeth on the silver sickle embedded into one slice. Harry watched Hagrid getting redder and redder in the face as he called for more wine, finally kissing Professor McGonagall on the cheek, who, to Harry's amazement, giggled and blushed. Her top hat lopsided. When Harry finally left the table, he was laden down with a stack of things out of the crackers, including a pack of non-explodable luminous balloons, a grow-your-own-warts kit, and his own new wizard's chess set. The white mice had disappeared, and Harry had a nasty feeling that they were going to end up as Mrs. Norris's Christmas dinner. Harry and the Weasleys spent the afternoon having a furious snowball fight on the grounds. Then, cold, wet, and gasping for breath, they returned to the fire in the Gryffindor common room, where Harry broke out his new chess set by losing spectacularly to Ron. He suspected he wouldn't have lost so badly if Percy hadn't tried to help him so much. After a meal of turkey sandwiches, crumpets, trifle, and Christmas cake, everyone felt too full and sleepy to do much before bed, except sit and watch Percy chase Fred and George all over the Gryffindor Tower because they had stolen his prefect badge. It had been Harry's best Christmas day ever, yet something had been nagging at the back of his mind all day. Not until he climbed into bed, free to think about it. The invisibility cloak, and who had sent it to him. Ron, full of turkey and cake, with nothing mysterious to bother him, fell asleep almost as soon as he'd drawn the curtains of his floor poster. Harry leaned over to the side of his own bed and pulled the cloak out from under it. His father's. That had been his father's. He let the material flow over his hands, smoother than silk, light as air. "Use it well," the note had said. He had to try it now. He slipped out of bed and wrapped the cloak around himself. Looking down at his legs, he saw only moonlight and shadows. It was a very funny feeling. Use it well. Suddenly, Harry felt wide awake. The whole of Hogwarts was open to him in this cloak. Excitement flooded through him as he stood there in the dark and silence. He could go anywhere in this, anywhere, and Filch would never know. Ron grunted in his sleep. Should Harry wake him? Something held him back. His father's cloak. He felt that this time, the first time, he wanted to use it alone. He crept out of the dormitory, down the stairs, across the common room, and climbed through the portrait hole. "Who's there?" squawked the fat lady. Harry said nothing. He walked quickly down the corridor. Where should he go? He stopped, his heart racing, and thought. And then it came to him. The restricted section in the library. He'd be able to read as long as he'd like, as long as it took him to find out who Flamel was. He set off, drawing the invisibility cloak tight around him as he walked. The library was pitch black and very eerie. Harry lit a lamp to see his way along a row of books. The lamp looked as if it were floating along in midair, and even though Harry could feel his arm supporting it, the sight gave him the creeps. The restricted section was right off the back of the library. Stepping carefully over the rope that separated these books from the rest of the library, he held out his lamp to read the titles. They didn't tell him much. Their peeling, faded gold letters spelled words in languages that Harry couldn't understand. Some had no title at all. One book had a dark stain on it that looked horribly like blood. The hairs on the back of Harry's neck prickled. Maybe he was imagining it, maybe not, but he thought a faint whispering was coming from one of the books, as though they knew someone was there that shouldn't be. He had to start somewhere. Setting the lamp down, carefully on the floor, he looked along the bottom shelf for an interesting-looking book. A large black and silver volume caught his eye. He pulled it out with difficulty because it was very heavy and balanced it upon his knee, letting it fall open. A piercing, blood-curdling shriek split the silence. The book was screaming. Harry snapped it shut, but the shriek went on and on, one high, unbroken, ear-splitting note. He stumbled backward and knocked over his lamp, which went out at once. Panicked, he heard footsteps coming down the corridor outside. Stuffing the shrieking book back on the shelf, Harry ran for it. He passed Filch in the doorway. Filch's pale, wild eyes looked straight through him, and Harry's...
Harry hiccuped.
Harry hiccuped. That was how he got away from Filch. Let me check 1 second.
He didn't slip, he hiccuped. Now we know.
Harry slipped under Filch's outstretched arm and streaked off the corridor, the book shriek still ringing in his ears. He came to a sudden halt in front of a tall suit of armor. He had been so busy getting away from the library that he hadn't paid attention to where he was going. Perhaps because it was dark, he didn't recognize where he was at all. There was a suit of armor near the kitchens, he knew, but it must be 5 floors above there.
You asked me to...
I can't remember what voice he used for Filch.
You asked me to come directly to you, Professor. If anyone was wandering around at night, and someone's been in the library, the restricted section.
Sounds like a pirate. I like a pirate.
Yeah, sure.
I like it, though. That's a good thing. Pirates are really cool.
And my king has married, and I owe my new queen a wedding gift.
Does that try to do more for Filch? Get it? No? Alright, anyway. Harry felt the blood drain out of his face. Wherever he was, Filch knew, must have known a shortcut, because his soft, greasy voice was getting nearer, and to his horror, it was Snape who replied.
The restricted section. Well, they can't be far. We'll catch them.
Harry stood, rooted to the spot, as Filch and Snape came around the corridor ahead. They couldn't see him, of course, but it was a narrow corridor, and if they came much nearer, they'd knock right into him. The cloak didn't stop him from being solid. He backed away as quietly as he could. A door stood ajar to his left. It was his only hope. He squeezed through it, holding his breath, trying not to move, and to his relief, he managed to get inside the room without their noticing anything. They walked straight past, and Harry leaned against the wall, breathing deeply, listening to their footsteps dying away. That had been close, very close. It was a few seconds before he noticed anything about the room that he had hidden in. It looked like an unused classroom. The dark shapes of the desks and chairs were piled against the walls, and there were upturned waste paper basket. But propped against the wall facing him was something that didn't look like it belonged there. Something that looked as if somebody had put it there to keep it out of the way. It was a magnificent mirror, as high as the ceiling, with ornate gold frame, standing on two clawed feet. There was an inscription carved around the top. Okay, let's try. Irised stra ehu ut ube kafru oit ushai.
It's actually oat instead of oit.
Oh, okay.
Not to be nitpicky, but it's my language.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
It's native tongue.
His panic fading now that there was no sound of Filch and Snape. Harry moved nearer to the mirror. That rhymes. Just fun fact for everyone. Wanting to get a look at himself, but seeing no reflection again. Harry stepped in front of it. He had to clap his hands on his mouth to stop himself from screaming. He rolled around. His heart was pounding far more furiously than when the book had screamed. For he had not only seen himself in the mirror, but a whole crowd of people standing right behind him. But the room was empty. Breathing very fast, he turned slowly back to the mirror. There he was, reflected in it, white and scared looking. I mean, scarred looking too, but yeah. Scared looking. And there, reflected behind him, were at least 10 others. Harry looked over his shoulder, but still no one was there. Or were they all invisible too? Was he in fact in a room full of invisible people, and this mirror's trick was that reflected them, invisible or not? He looked at the mirror again. A woman was standing right behind his reflection and was smiling at him and waving. He reached out his hand and felt the air behind him. If she was really there, he'd be able to touch her. Their reflections were so close together. But he felt only air. She and the others existed only in the mirror. She was a very pretty woman. She had dark red hair, and her eyes are just like mine, Harry thought, edging a little closer to the glass. Bright green, exactly the same shape. But then he noticed that she was crying. Smiling, but crying at the same time. A tall, thin, black-haired man standing next to her put his arm around her. He wore glasses, and his hair was very untidy. It stuck up in the back just as Harry's did. Harry was so close to the mirror now that his nose nearly touching that of his reflection.
Mom?
He whispered.
Dad?
They just looked at him,
Dad?
smiling. And slowly, Harry looked into the faces of the other people in the mirror and saw other pairs of green eyes like him, other noses like his, even a little old man who looked as though he had Harry's knobbly knees. Harry was looking at his family for the first time in his life. The Potters smiled and waved at Harry, and he stared hungrily back at them. His hands pressed flat against the glass.
Here's what I found.
Oh my gosh. Siri? Are you kidding me? Dude, what did you read for Siri to freak us out like that? You legit jumped. Your jumping scared me.
How do we get rid of this? Oh, wow.
You literally jumped. I can't wait to view that again. And then I just went
Oh, man.
Whew, that'll wake us up. Okay. Moving up.
My heart's beating.
It's awesome.
That was the worst.
This scene is intense.
Yeah, that's why. That's so silly. I don't know if that's viewable to you guys or not. Or not viewable, but audibly.
Serious listening is what he's trying to say.
Yep, the words can't get them out. I can only get them out when I read them off the book, right? All right. Where did we go? He had a powerful kind of ache inside him, half joy, half terrible sadness. How long he stood there, he didn't know. The reflections did not fade, and he looked and looked until a distant noise brought him back to his senses. He couldn't stay there long. He couldn't stay here. He had to find his way back to bed. He tore his eyes away from his mother's face and whispered,
"I'll come back,"
and hurried from the room.
"You could have woken me up,"
said Ron crossly.
"You can come tonight. I'm going back. I want to show you the mirror. I'd like to see your mom and dad."
Ron said eagerly.
And I want to see all your family. And I want to see all your family, all the Weasleys. You'll be able to show me your other brothers and everyone. I keep messing. You can see them any old time,"
said Ron.
"Just come around my house this summer. Anyways, maybe it only shows dead people. Shame about not finding Flamel, though. Have some bacon or something? Why aren't you eating anything?"
Harry couldn't eat. He had seen his parents, and he would be seeing them again tonight. He'd almost forgotten about Flamel. It didn't seem very important anymore. Who cared about what a three-headed dog was guarding? What did it matter if Snape stole it?
"Really? Are you alright?"
said Ron.
"You look odd."
What Harry feared most was that he wouldn't be able to find the mirror room again. With Ron covered in the cloak too, they had to walk much more slowly the next night. They tried retracing Harry's route from the library, wandering around the dark passageway for nearly an hour.
"I'm freezing,"
said Ron.
"Let's forget it and go back." "No!"
Harry hissed.
"I know it's here somewhere."
They passed the ghost of a tall witch gliding in the opposite direction, but saw no one else. Just as Ron started moaning that his feet were dead and cold, Harry spotted the suit of armor.
"It's here. Just here. Yes!"
They pushed the door open. Harry dropped the cloak from around his shoulders and ran to the mirror. They were there. His mother and father were beaming at the sight of him.
"See?"
Harry whispered.
"I can't see anything. Look. Look at them all. There are loads of them. I can only see you. Look at it properly. Go on. Stand where I am."
Harry stepped aside. But with Ron in front of the mirror, he couldn't see his family anymore. Just Ron in his paisley pajamas. Ron, though, was staring transfixed at his image.
"Look at me,"
he said.
"Can you see your family standing around you?" "No, I'm alone. But I'm different. I look older. And I'm a head boy." "What?" "I am. I'm wearing the badge like Bill used to. And I'm holding the house cup and the Quidditch cup. And I'm Quidditch captain, too."
Ron tore his eyes away from this splendid sight to look excitedly at Harry.
"Do you think this mirror can show us the future?" "How can it? All my family are dead. Let me have another look. You had it to yourself last night. Give me a bit more time." "You're only holding a Quidditch cup. What's interesting about that? I want to see my parents." "Don't push me."
A sudden noise outside the corridor put an end to their discussion. They hadn't realized how loudly they had been talking.
"Quick."
Ron threw the cloak back over them as the luminous eyes of Mrs. Norris came around the corner. Ron and Harry stood quite still, both thinking the same thing. Did the cloak work on cats? After what seemed an age, she turned and left.
"This isn't safe. She might have gone for Filch. I bet she heard us. Come on."
And Ron pulled Harry out of the room. The snow still hadn't melted the next morning.
"Want to play chess, Harry?"
said Ron.
"No." "Why don't we go down and visit Hagrid?" "No, you go." I know what you're thinking about, Harry. That mirror. Don't go back tonight." "Why not?" "I don't know. I've just got a bad feeling about it. Anyways, you've had too many close shaves already. Filch, Snape, and Mrs. Norris are wandering around. So what if they can't see you? What if they walk into you? What if you knock something over?" "You sound like Hermione." "I'm serious, Harry. Don't go."
But Harry only had one thought in his head, which was, to get back in front of the mirror, and Ron wasn't going to stop him. That third night, he found his way more quickly than before. He was walking so fast, he knew he was making more noise than was wise. But he didn't meet anyone. And there were his mother and father smiling at him again, and one of his grandfathers nodding happily. Harry sank down to sit on the floor in front of the mirror. There was nothing to stop him from staying here all night with his family. Nothing at all. Except...
So, back again, Harry.
Harry felt as though his insides had turned to ice. He looked behind him. Sitting on one of the desks by the wall was none other than Albus Dumbledore. Harry must have walked straight past him, so desperate to get to the mirror that he hadn't noticed him.
I didn't see you, sir.
Strange how nearsighted being invisible can make you,
said Dumbledore, and Harry was relieved to see that he was smiling.
So,
said Dumbledore, slipping off the desk to sit on the floor with Harry.
You, like hundreds before you, have discovered the delights of the Mirror of Erised.
I didn't know it was called that, sir.
But I expect you've realized by now what it does.
Well, it shows me my family.
And it showed your friend Ron himself as head boy.
How did you know?
I don't need a cloak to make myself invisible, said Dumbledore gently. Now, can you think of what the Mirror of Erised shows us all?
Harry shook his head.
Let me explain. The happiest man on earth would be able to use the Mirror of Erised like a normal mirror. That is, he would look into it and see himself exactly as he is. Does that help?
Harry thought. And then he said slowly,
It shows us what we want. Whatever we want.
Yes, and no,
said Dumbledore quietly.
It shows us nothing more or less than the deepest, most desperate desire of our hearts. You have never known your family, and see them standing around you. Ronald Weasley, who has always been overshadowed by his brothers, sees himself standing alone, the best of all of them. However, this mirror will give us neither knowledge nor truth. Men have wasted away before it, entranced by what they have seen, or been driven mad, not knowing if it shows real or even the possible. The mirror will be moved to a new home tomorrow, Harry. And I ask you not to go looking for it again. If you ever do run across it, you will be prepared. It does not do well to dwell upon dreams and forget to live. Remember that.
That's a good quote.
It is.
Dang.
Now, why don't you put on that admirable cloak and get back off to bed?
Harry stood up.
Sir, Professor Dumbledore, can I ask you something?
Obviously, you've just done.
Dumbledore smiled.
You may ask me one more thing, however.
What do you see when you look into the mirror?
I see myself holding a pair of thick woolen socks.
Harry stared.
One can never have enough socks,
said Dumbledore.
Another Christmas has come and gone, and I didn't get a single pair. People will insist on giving me books.
It was only when he was back in bed that it struck Harry that Dumbledore might not have been quite truthful. But then, he thought as he shoved Scabbers off his pillow, it might have been a quite personal question.
But he said, it does not do well to dwell on dreams and forget to live. Remember that. That is so good. Like, honestly, profound.
Yeah.
Also, I gotta stretch because we're halfway through. We're reading so many chapters today. Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to be without dinner.
Oh yeah, you didn't even eat dinner.
Yeah.
I just had, I don't know, a big snack, but not really because you didn't have dinner around. Alright. Let's power through, Jacob.
Power!
Chapter 13. Nicholas Flamel.
Congratulations.
Page 215. Wow, we are almost done. Okay.
2 more chapters, and then we are, we'll finish up tomorrow. It's exciting stuff.
And then it's Chamber of Secrets. My goodness. Dumbledore had finally convinced Harry not to go looking for the Mirror of what do you call it? Erised? Yeah, you think so? Yeah, I like that. The Mirror of Erised again. And for the rest of Christmas holidays, the invisibility cloak stayed folded at the bottom. Harry wished he could forget what he'd seen in the mirror as easily, but he couldn't. He stared, having nightmares. Over and over again, he dreamed about his parents disappearing in a flash of green light, while a high voice cackled with laughter. You see, Dumbledore was right. That mirror could drive you mad, said Ron, when Harry told him about these dreams. Hermione, who came back the day before the term started, took a different view of things. She was torn between horror at the idea of Harry being out of bed, roaming the school 3 nights in a row,
If Filch caught you.
and disappointment that he hadn't at least found out who Nicholas Flamel was. They had almost given up hope of ever finding Flamel in a library book, even though Harry was still sure he'd read the name somewhere. Once term had started, they were back to skimming through books for 10 minutes during their breaks. Harry had even less time than the other two, because Quidditch practice had started again. Wood was working the team harder than ever. Even the endless rain that had replaced the snow couldn't dampen his spirits. The Weasleys complained that Wood was becoming a fanatic, but Harry was on Wood's side. If they'd won their next match, against Hufflepuff, they would overtake Slytherin in the house championship for the first time in 7 years. Quite apart from wanting to win, Harry found that he had fewer nightmares when he was tired after training. Then, during one particularly wet and muddy practice session, Wood gave the team a bit of bad news. He'd just gotten very angry with the Weasleys, who kept dive-bombing each other and pretending to fall off their brooms. Will you stop messing around? He yelled. That's exactly the sort of thing that'll lose us the match, dudes. Snape's refereeing this time, and he'll look for any excuse to knock off points in Gryffindor in the most bodacious way. George Weasley really did fall off his broom at these words.
Snape's refereeing? Refereeing?
What was it? Do you want to do that again?
I said Snape's refereeing.
Oh,
I don't know what that
refereeing.
Snape's refereeing?
He sputtered through a mouthful of mud.
Would he ever ref a Quidditch match? He's not going to fair. We might overtake Slytherin.
The rest of the team landed next to George to complain too. It's not my fault, said Wood.
It's the worst leader ever. You can't take him seriously.
It's not my fault. We just got to make sure we play a clean game, dudes. So Snape hasn't got an excuse to pick us.
Little did people know that Quidditch was actually like surfing.
Dude, for real.
Dude, this water tastes disgusting.
Nice.
Continue.
Thanks. Which was all very well, thought Harry, but he had another reason for not wanting Snape near him while he was playing Quidditch. The rest of the team hung back to talk to one another as usual at the end of practice, but Harry headed straight back to Gryffindor Common Room, where he found Ron and Hermione playing chess. Chess was the only thing Hermione ever lost at, something Harry and Ron thought was very good for her. Don't talk to me for a moment, said Ron when Harry sat down next to him. I need to concentrate.
Yeah.
Goodness. He caught sight of Harry's face. What's the matter with you? You look terrible. Speaking quietly so that no one else would hear, Harry told the other two about Snape's sudden, sinister desire to be a Quidditch referee.
Can I just say one thing real quick?
Yeah.
This is totally off topic, but whenever I hear the phrase "you look terrible," you know what comes into my mind, Stephen?
What comes to mind, Jacob?
Legolas putting an arm on a hand upon Aragorn's shoulder as Aragorn has come back to Helm's Deep after everyone thought he's dead, and his only phrase is just, "You look terrible." All right.
That's funny. That's a great thing to think of. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Lord of the Rings. Love it.
Don't play, said
Hermione at once. Say you're ill, said Ron.
Pretend to break your leg,
Hermione suggested. Really break your leg, said Ron. Dang. I can't, said Harry. There isn't a reserve seeker. If I back out, Gryffindor can't play at all. At that moment, Neville toppled into the common room. How he had managed to climb through the portrait hole was anyone's guess, because his legs had been stuck together with what they recognized as the leg locker curse. He must have oh my goodness, Stefan. He must have had to bunny hop all the way up to Gryffindor Tower. Everyone fell over laughing except Hermione, who leapt up and performed the counter curse. Neville's legs sprang apart and he got to his feet, trembling.
What happened?
Hermione asked him, leading him over to sit with Harry and Ron.
Malfoy,
said Neville shakily.
I met him outside the library. He said he'd been looking for someone to practice that on. Go tell Professor McGonagall.
Hermione urged Neville.
Report him.
Neville shook his head.
I don't want any more trouble,
he mumbled. You've got to stand up to him, Neville, said Ron. He's used to walking all over people, but that's no reason to lie down in front of him and make it easier.
There's no need to tell me I'm not brave enough to be in Gryffindor. Malfoy's already done that.
Neville choked up. Harry felt in the pocket of his robes and pulled out a chocolate frog, the very last one from the box Hermione had given him for Christmas. He gave it to Neville, who looked as though he might cry. You're worth 12 of Malfoy, Harry said. The Sorting Hat chose you for Gryffindor, didn't it? And where's Malfoy? And stinking Slytherin. Neville's lip twitched in his weak smile as he unwrapped the frog.
Thanks, Harry. I think I'll go to bed. Do you want the card? You collect them, don't you?
As Neville walked away, Harry looked at the famous wizard card. Dumbledore again, he said. He was the first one I ever... He gasped. He stared at the back of the card. Then he looked up at Ron and Hermione. I found him, he whispered. I found Flamel. I told you I'd read the name somewhere before. I read it on the train coming here. Listen to this. Dumbledore is particularly famous for his defeat of the dark wizard Grindelwald in 1945, for the discovery of the 12 uses of dragon's blood, and his work on the alchemy with his partner, Nicholas Flamel. Hermione jumped to her feet. She hadn't looked so excited since they'd gotten back the marks for their very first piece of homework.
Sorry, I'm just thinking of how this event transpires in the movie. Stay there,
she said, and sprinted up the stairs to the girls' dormitories. Harry and Ron barely had the time to exchange mystified looks before she was dashing back, an enormous old book in her arms.
I never thought to look up there,
she whispered excitedly.
I checked this out weeks ago for a bit of light reading.
Light? Said Ron, but Hermione told him to be quiet until she'd looked something up, and started flicking frantically through the pages, muttering to herself. At last she found what she was looking for.
I knew it! I knew it!
Are we allowed to speak yet? Said Ron grumpily. Hermione ignored him.
Here it is. Nicholas Flamel.
She whispered dramatically.
Is the only known maker of the Sorcerer's Stone.
This didn't have quite the effect she'd expected. The what? Said Harry and Ron.
Oh, honestly, don't you two read? Look, read there.
She pushed the book toward them, and Harry and Ron read, The ancient study of alchemy is concerned with making the Sorcerer's Stone, a legendary substance with astonishing powers, the stone into pure gold. It also produces the elixir of life, which will make the drinker immortal. There have been many reports of Sorcerer's Stone all over the countries, but the only stone currently in existence belongs to Mr. Nicholas Flamel, the noted alchemist and opera lover. Mr. Flamel, who celebrated his 665th birthday last year, enjoys a quiet life in Devon with his wife, Pernelli, 658.
We'll just call her P-Dog.
P-Dog. With a quiet life in Devon with his wife, P-Dog, 658. Wow.
See?
Said Hermione, when Harry and Ron had finished.
The dog must be guarding the Sorcerer's Stone. I bet he asked Dumbledore to keep it safe for him, because they're friends, and he knew that someone was after it. That's why he wanted the stone moved from Gringotts.
A stone that makes gold and stops you from ever dying, said Harry. No wonder Snape's after it. Anyone would want it. And no wonder we couldn't find Flamel in that study of recent developments in wizardry, said Ron. He's not exactly recent if he's 665, is he? The next morning in defense against the dark arts, while copying down different ways of treating werewolf bites, Harry and Ron were still discussing what they'd do with a sorcerer's stone if they had one. It wasn't until Ron had said goodbye to his own Quidditch team that Harry remembered about Snape and the coming match. I'm going to play, he told Ron and Hermione. If I don't, all the Slytherins will think I'm just too scared to face Snape. I'll show them. It'll really wipe the smiles off their faces if we win.
Just as long as we're not wiping you off the field,
said Hermione. As the match drew nearer, however, Harry became more and more nervous, whatever he told Ron and Hermione. The rest of the team wasn't too calm either. The idea of overtaking Slytherin in the house championship was wonderful. No one had done it for 7 years. Would they be allowed to, with such a biased referee? Harry didn't know whether he was imagining it or not, but he seemed to be running into Snape wherever he went. At times, he even wondered whether Snape was following him, trying to catch him on his own. Potion lessons were running into a sort of weekly torture. Snape was so horrible to Harry. Could Snape possibly know when they'd found out about the Sorcerer's Stone? Harry didn't see how he could, yet he sometimes had the horrible feeling that Snape could read minds. Foreshadowing to a much later date. What? Anyways, Harry knew, when they wished him good luck outside the locker rooms the next afternoon, that Ron and Hermione were wondering whether they'd ever see him alive again. This wasn't what you'd call comforting. Harry hardly heard a word of Wood's pep talk as he pulled on his Quidditch Nimbus 2000. Dids. Excellent. Ron and Hermione, meanwhile, had found a place in the stands next to Neville, who couldn't understand why they looked so grim and worried, or why they had both brought their wands to the match. Little did Harry know that Ron and Hermione had been secretly practicing the leg locker curse. They'd gotten the idea from Malfoy using it on Neville, and were ready to use it on Snape if he showed any sign of wanting to hurt Harry.
Now don't forget, it's locomotor mortis,
Hermione muttered as Ron slipped his wand up his sleeve. I know, Ron snapped. Don't nag. Back in the locker room, Wood had already taken Harry aside. Don't want to pressure you, dude, Potter. But if we ever need a capture of the snitch, it's now. Finish the game before Snake can favor Hufflepuff way too much.
The whole school's out there,
said Fred Weasley, peering out of the door.
Even, blimey, Dumbledore's come to watch.
Harry's heart did a somersault. Dumbledore? He said, dashing to the door to make sure. Fred was right. There was no mistaking that Silverbeard. Harry could have laughed out loud with relief. He was safe. There was simply no way that Snape would dare to try to hurt him if Dumbledore was watching. Perhaps that's why Snape was looking so angry as the teams marched onto the field, something that Ron noticed too.
That's Ron.
Oh, he told Hermione, not... Oh my, what have I done? I've never seen Snape look so mean, he told Hermione. Look, they're off. Ouch. Someone had poked Ron in the back of the head. It was Malfoy.
Oh, sorry, Weasley. Didn't see you there.
Malfoy grinned broadly at Crabbe and Goyle.
Wonder how Potter's going to stay on his broom this time. Anyone want to bet? What about you, Weasley?
Ron didn't answer. Snape had just awarded Hufflepuff a penalty because George Weasley had hit a bludger at him. Hermione, who had all her fingers crossed in her lap, was squinting fixedly at Harry, who was circling the game like a hawk, looking for the snitch.
You know how they choose people for the Gryffindor team,
said Malfoy loudly a few minutes later, as Snape awarded Hufflepuff another penalty for no reason at all.
It's people they feel sorry for. See, there's Potter, who's got no parents. Then there's the Weasley. They've got no money. You should have been on the team, Longbottom. You've got no brains.
Neville went bright red, but turned in his seat to face Malfoy.
I'm worth 12 of you, Malfoy,
he stammered. Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle howled with laughter, but Ron, still not daring to take his eyes from the game, said, "You tell him, Neville."
Longbottom, if brains were gold, you'd be poorer than Weasley. And that's saying something.
Ron's nerves were already stretched to the breaking point with anxiety about Harry. "I'm warning you, Malfoy. One more word,"
Ron!
said Hermione suddenly.
Harry!
"What? Where?" Harry had suddenly gone into a spectacular dive, which drew gasps and cheers from the crowd. Hermione stood up, her crossed fingers in her mouth, as Harry streaked toward the ground like a bullet.
You're in luck, Weasley. Potter's obviously spotted some money on the ground,
said Malfoy. Ron snapped. Before Malfoy knew what was happening, Ron was on top of him, wrestling him to the ground. Neville hesitated, then clambered over the back of his seat to help.
Come on, Harry!
Hermione screamed, leaping onto her seat to watch as Harry sped straight at Snape. She didn't even notice Malfoy and Ron rolling under her seat, or the scuffles and yelps coming from the whirl of fists that was Neville, Crabbe, and Goyle. Up in the air, Snape turned on his broomstick just in time to see something scarlet shoot past him, missing him by inches. The next second, Harry had pulled out of the dive, his arms raised in triumph, the snake clasped in his hand. The stands erupted. It had to be a record. No one could ever remember the snitch being caught so quickly.
Ron, where are you? The game's over. Harry's won. We've won. Gryffindor's in the lead.
Shrieked Hermione, dancing up and down on her seat and hugging Patil in the row in the front. Harry jumped off his broom, a foot from the ground. He couldn't believe it. He'd done it. The game was over. It had barely lasted 5 minutes. As Gryffindors came spilling onto the field, he saw Snape land nearby, white-faced and tight-lipped. Then Harry felt a hand on his shoulder and looked up into Dumbledore's smiling face.
Well done,
said Dumbledore quietly, so that only Harry could hear.
Nice to see you haven't been brooding about that mirror. Been keeping busy. Excellent.
Snape bitterly on the ground. Harry left the locker room alone sometime later to take his Nimbus 2000 back to the broom shed. He couldn't ever remember feeling happier. He'd done something to be proud of now. No one could say he was just a famous name anymore. The evening air had never smelled so sweet. He walked over the damp grass, reliving the last hour in his head, which was a happy blur. Gryffindors running to lift him onto their shoulders. Ron and Hermione in the distance, jumping up and down. Ron cheering through a heavy nosebleed. Harry had reached the shed. He leaned against the wooden door and looked up at Hogwarts, with its windows glowing red in the setting sun. Gryffindor in the lead. He'd done it. He'd showed Snape. And speaking of Snape... Excuse me. Are you good?
My feet are just covered in mosquito bites.
And I just imagine the mic sound just being...
Oh, yeah. Probably. Sorry, guys.
And speaking of Snape, a pudding came swiftly down the front steps of the castle, clearly not wanting to be seen as it walked as fast as possible toward the forbidden forest. Harry's victory faded from his mind as he watched. He recognized the figure's prowling walk. Snape sneaking into the forest while everyone else was at dinner. Gone. Harry jumped back on his Nimbus 2000 and took off. Gliding silently over the castle, he saw Snape enter the forest at a run. He followed. The trees were so thick he couldn't see where Snape had gone. He flew in circles, lower and lower, brushing the top branches of the trees until he heard voices. He headed toward them and landed noiselessly in a towering beech tree. He climbed carefully along, holding tight to his broomstick, trying to see through the leaves. Below, in a shadowy clearing, stood Snape, but he wasn't alone. Quirrell was there, too. Harry couldn't make out the look on his face, but he was stuttering worse than ever. Harry strained to catch what they were saying.
Don't know why you wanted to meet me here of all places, Severus. Oh, I thought we'd keep this private,
said Snape, his voice icy.
Students aren't supposed to know about the Sorcerer's Stone after all.
Harry leaned forward. Quirrell was mumbling something. Snape interrupted him.
Have you found out how to get past that beast of Hagrid's yet? But, Severus, you don't want me as your enemy, Quirrell.
Said Snape, taking a step toward him.
I don't know what you know perfectly well what I mean.
Now hooted loudly, and Harry nearly fell out of the tree. He steadied himself in time to hear Snape say,
Your little bit of hocus pocus. I'm waiting. But very well.
Snape cut in.
We'll have another little chat soon when you've had time to think things over and decided where your loyalties lie.
He threw his cloak over his head and strode out of the clearing. It was almost dark now, but Harry could see Quirrell, standing quite still as though he was petrified. As a reminder, the 3 dots mean time has passed, and we don't know how much time until we pick up where we left off. My students, I expect you already know that, because you have the best teacher of all time. Anyways.
Harry, where have you been?
Hermione squeaked. We won! You won! We won! Shouted Ron, thumping Harry on the back. And I gave Malfoy a black eye, and Neville tried to take on Crabbe and Goyle single-handed. He's still out cold, but Madame Pomfrey says he'll be all right. Talk about showing Slytherin. Everyone's waiting for you in the common room. We're having a party. Fred and George stole some cakes and stuff from the kitchen. Neville's just done. What a good guy, though.
That's such a good line.
That's such a
He
good
took
friend.
them on single-handedly. He's out cold, but things are good. I love
He
it.
legit took on them. Oh my god, that's great. Never mind that now, said Harry breathlessly. Let's find an empty room. You wait till you hear this. He made sure Peeves wasn't inside before shutting the door behind them. Then he told them what he'd seen and heard.
Harry.
So we were right. It is the Sorcerer's Stone. And Snape's trying to force Quirrell to help him get it. He asked if he knew how to get past Fluffy, and he said something about Quirrell's hocus pocus. I reckon there are some other things regarding the stone apart from Fluffy. Loads of enchantments, probably. And Quirrell would have done some anti-dark spells that Snape needs to break through.
So, you mean the stone's only safe as long as Quirrell stands up to Snape?
Said Hermione in alarm. It'll be gone by next Tuesday, said Ron. Dude, this is a marathon. One more.
Marathon.
Let's do this thing.
Yeah, heck yeah.
Heck yeah, dude. Alright.
Nice.
Yeah, Oliver Wood, dude. Love
Oliver Wood is now a surfer, and I love every part of it.
I know you do.
Thanks. You know me well.
Alright. Shall we move on to the next chapter? Chapter 14.
Absolutely.
Norbert the Norwegian Ridgeback.
Oh, goodness.
Should I read in that voice the whole time?
No.
No? You don't think that's engaging? Alright. No, I don't even know what it is. I'm just... Quirrell, however, must have been braver than they thought. In the weeks that followed, he did seem to be getting paler and thinner, but it didn't look as if he cracked yet. Every time they passed the third floor corridor, Harry, Ron, and Hermione would press their ears to the door to check that Fluffy was still growling inside. Snape was sweeping about in his usual bad temper, which was surely meant that the stone was still safe. Whenever Harry passed Quirrell these days, he gave him an encouraging sort of smile, and Ron started telling people off for laughing at Quirrell's stutter. Hermione, however, had more on her mind than the Sorcerer's Stone. She had started drawing up study schedules and color-coding all of her notes. That just makes me smile. Harry and Ron wouldn't have minded, but she kept nagging them to do the same.
Hermione, the exams are ages away.
10 weeks, Hermione snapped. That's not ages. That's like a second to Nicholas Flamel.
But we're not 600 years old.
Ron reminded her.
Anyway, what are you studying for? You already know it all.
What am I studying for? Are you crazy? You realize that we have to pass these exams to get into the second year. They're very important. I should have started studying months ago. I don't know what's gotten into me. And unfortunately, the teachers seemed to be thinking along the same lines as Hermione. They piled so much homework onto them over the Easter holidays that they weren't nearly as fun as Christmas ones. It was hard to relax when Hermione was next to you reciting the 12 uses of dragon's blood, or practicing wand movements. Moaning and yawning, Harry and Ron spent most of their free time in the library with her, trying to get through all their extra work.
I'll never this.
Ron burst out one afternoon, throwing down his quill and looking longingly out the library window. It was the first. It was the first really fine day that they'd haven't had in months. The sky was clear, forget-me-not blue, and there was a feeling in the air that summer was coming. Harry, who was looking up from Dittany, one of the 1,000 magical herbs and fungi, didn't look up until he heard Ron say,
Hagrid, what are you doing in the library?
Hagrid shuffled into view, hiding something behind his back. He looked very out of place in his moleskin overcoat.
Just looking,
He said, in a shifty voice that got their interest at once.
what you up to?
He looked suddenly suspicious.
Not looking for Nicholas Flamel, are you?
Oh, we found out who he is ages ago.
Said Ron impressively.
And we know what the Dark Garden. It's the Sorcerer's...
Hagrid looked around quickly to see if anyone else was listening.
Don't go shouting about it. What's the matter with you?
There are a few things that we wanted to ask you, as a matter of fact.
Said Harry.
About what's guarding the stone apart from Fluffy.
Said Hagrid again.
Listen, come and see me later. I'm not promising I'll tell you nothing, but don't go rabbiting about it here. Sterns aren't supposed to know. They'll think I've told you.
I just yawned. Oh my god. That's so rude. At the worst time, too. See you later, then.
Said Harry. Hagrid shuffled off. What was he hiding behind his back? Said Hermione thoughtfully.
Do you think it has anything to... Oh, no, that's Hermione again. Right?
Sure. Do you think it has anything to do with the stone?
I'm going to see what section he was in.
Said Ron, who had had enough of working. He came back a minute later with a pile of books in his arms and slammed them down onto the table.
Dragons.
He whispered.
Hagrid was looking up stuff about dragons. Look at these. Dragon species of Great Britain and Ireland, from Egg to Inferno, a dragon keeper's guide. Hagrid always wanted a dragon. He told me so the first time I ever met him.
Said Harry.
But it's against our laws.
Said Ron.
Dragon breeding was outlawed by Warlocks' Convention of 1709. Everyone knows that. It's hard to stop muggles from noticing us if we're keeping dragons in the back garden. Anyways, you can't tame dragons. It's dangerous. You should see the burns Charlie got off wild ones in Romania. But there aren't any wild dragons in Britain?
Said Harry.
Of course there are.
Said Ron.
Common Welsh Green and Hebridean Blacks. The Ministry of Magic has a job hushing them up. I can tell you. Our kind have to keep putting spells on muggles who've spotted them, to make them forget.
So, what on earth is Hagrid up to? Said Hermione. When they knocked on the door of the gamekeeper's hut about an hour later, they were surprised to see all the curtains were closed. Hagrid called out,
Who is it?
before he let them in, and then shut the door quickly behind them. It was stifling hot inside, even though it was such a warm day. There was a blazing fire in the grate. Hagrid made them tea, and offered them stoat sandwiches, which they refused.
So, you wanted to ask me something?
Yes.
Said Harry. There was no point beating around the bush.
We were wondering if you could tell us what's guarding the Sorcerer's Stone apart from Fluffy.
Hagrid frowned at them.
Of course I can, he said. Number 1, I don't know myself. Number 2, you know too much already, so I wouldn't tell you even if I could. The stone's here for good reason. It was almost stolen out of Gringotts. Supposed you worked that out and all. Beats me how you come to know about Fluffy.
Oh, come on, Hagrid. You might...
That's Hermione.
That's
Come
Hermione.
on, Hagrid. You might not want to tell us, but you do know. You know everything that goes on around here, said Hermione in a warm, flattering voice. Hagrid's beard twitched, and they could tell he was smiling. We only wondered who had done the guarding, really, Hermione went on. We wondered who Dumbledore had trusted enough to help him, apart from you. Hagrid's chest swelled at the last words. Harry and Ron beamed at Hermione.
Well, I suppose it couldn't hurt to tell you that. Let's see. You borrowed Fluffy from me, and some of the teachers did enchantments. Professor Sprout, Professor Flitwick, Professor McGonagall.
He ticked off his fingers.
Professor Quirrell. Dumbledore himself did something, of course, and hang on, forgotten someone. Oh, yeah, Professor Snape.
Snape?
Yeah, you won't steal on about him, are you? Look, Snape helped protect the stone. He's not about to steal it.
Harry knew Ron and Hermione were thinking the same thing that he was. If Snape had been protecting the stone, it must have been easy to find out how the other teachers had been guarding it. He probably knew everything, except it seemed Quirrell's spell, and how to get past Fluffy.
You're the only one who knows how to get past Fluffy, aren't you, Hagrid?
Said Harry anxiously.
And you wouldn't tell anyone, would you? Not even one of the teachers?
Not a soul knows except me and Dumbledore,
Said Hagrid proudly.
Well, that's something.
Harry muttered to the others.
Hagrid, can we have a window open? I'm boiling.
Can't, Harry, sorry.
Said Hagrid. Harry noticed him glance at the fire. Harry looked at it too.
Hagrid, what's that?
But he already knew what it was. In the very heart of the fire, underneath the kettle, was a large black egg.
Ah,
Said Hagrid, fiddling nervously with his beard.
that's,
Where did you get it, Hagrid?
Said Ron, crouching over the fire, looking closely at the egg.
It must have cost you a fortune.
won it, said Hagrid, last night. Down at the village, had a few drinks, and got into a game of cards with the stranger. I think he was quite glad to get rid of it, to be honest.
But what are you going to do with it once it's hatched? Said Hermione.
Well, been doing some reading,
Said Hagrid, pulling a large book out of his under his pillow.
Got this out of the library, Dungeon Breeding for Pleasure and Profit. It's a bit out of date, of course, but it's all in here. Keep the egg in the fire, 'cause their mothers breathe on 'em, see? And when it hatches, feed it a bucket of brandy, mixed with chicken's blood every half hour, and... See, here, Dow's to recognize a different egg. Now this I got here is Norwegian Ridgeback.
Yo.
They're rare, them.
He looked very pleased with himself, but Hermione didn't. Hagrid, you live in a wooden house, he said. But Hagrid wasn't listening. He was humming merrily as he stoked the fire. So now they had something else to worry about. What might happen to Hagrid if anyone found out that he was hiding an illegal dragon in his hut?
Wonder what it's like to have a peaceful life.
Said Ron. Ron sighed. As evening after evening, they struggled through all the extra homework that they were getting. Hermione had now started making study schedules for Harry and Ron too. This was driving them nuts. Then, one breakfast time, Hedwig from Hagrid. He had written only 2 words. It's hatching. It's hatching! It's hatching! Sorry.
What is that?
It's working! It's working!
I forget what that's from.
It's Phantom Menace.
Oh, yeah.
Ron wanted to skip herbology and go straight down to the hut. Hermione wouldn't hear of it.
Oh, I totally lost my spot.
Ron. Hermione. Hermione.
Hermione, how many times in our lives are we going to see a dragon hatching?
We've got lessons. We'll get into trouble. And that's nothing to do what Hagrid's going to be doing when Hagrid's going to be in... goodness gracious. We'll get into trouble, and that's nothing to what Hagrid's going to be in when someone finds out what he's doing.
Shut up!
Harry whispered.
Dang, Harry, that's messed up.
Malfoy was only a few feet away, and he had stopped dead to listen. How much had he heard? Harry didn't like the look on Malfoy's face at all. Ron and Hermione argued all the way to herbology, and in the end, Hermione agreed to run down to Hagrid's with the other 2 during morning break. When the bell sounded from the castle at the end of their lesson, 3 of them dropped their towels. Trowels, not towels.
Trowels. Trowels?
Dropped their towels. Ah! Dropped their trowels at once and hurried through the grounds at the edge of the forest. Hagrid greeted them, looking flushed and excited.
It's nearly out.
He ushered them inside. The egg was lying on the table. There were deep cracks in it. Something was moving inside. A funny clicking noise was coming from it. They all drew their chairs up to the table and watched with basic, battered breath. All at once there was a scraping noise, and the egg split open. The baby dragon flopped onto the table. It wasn't exactly pretty. Harry thought it looked like a crumpled black umbrella. Its spiny wings were huge compared to its skinny jet body. It had long snout with wide nostrils, the stubs of horns, bulging orange eyes. It sneezed, and a couple of sparks flew out of its nose.
Isn't he beautiful?
Hagrid murmured. He reached out a hand to stroke the dragon's head. It snapped at its fingers, showing them pointed fangs.
Bless him. Look, he knows his mummy,
said Hagrid. Hagrid, said Hermione, how fast do Norwegian Ridgebacks grow exactly? Hagrid was about to answer when the color suddenly drained from his face. He leapt to his feet and ran to the window.
Oh my goodness. What's the matter?
Someone was looking through the gap in the curtains. It's a kid and running back up to the school.
Harry bolted to the door and looked out. Even at the distance, there was no mistaking it. Malfoy had seen the dragon. Something about the smile lurking on Malfoy's face during the next week made Harry, Ron, and Hermione very nervous. They spent most of their free time in Hagrid's darkened hut, trying to reason with him.
Just let him go.
Harry
Set him free.
I can't,
said Hagrid.
he's too little. He'll die.
They looked at the dragon. Not to say dungeon. It had grown 3 times in length in just a week. Smoke kept furling out of his nostrils. Hagrid hadn't been doing his gamekeeping duties because the dragon was keeping him so busy. There were... Oh my god, I just got big pain all of a sudden. There were empty brandy bottles and chicken feathers all over the floor.
I decided to call him Norbert,
said Hagrid, looking at the dragon with misty eyes.
He really knows me now. Watch. Norbert, where's Mummy?
He's lost his marble.
Ron muttered in Harry's ear.
Hagrid,
said Harry loudly.
Give it 2 weeks and Norbert's going to be as long as your house. Malfoy could go to Dumbledore at any moment.
Hagrid bit his lip.
I know. I can't keep him forever, but I just can't dump him. I can't.
Harry suddenly had a thought.
Charlie,
He said.
you're losing it too.
Said Ron.
I'm Ron, remember? No, Charlie. Your brother, Charlie, in Romania, studying dragons. We can send Norbert to him. Charlie can take care of him and then put him back in the wild. Brilliant.
Said Ron.
How about it, Hagrid?
And in the end, Hagrid agreed that they could send the owl to Charlie and ask. The following week dragged by. Wednesday night found Hermione and Harry sitting alone in the common room long after everyone else had gone to bed. The clock on the wall had just chimed midnight when the portrait hole burst open. Ron appeared out of nowhere as he pulled off Harry's invisibility cloak. He had been down at Hagrid's hut, helping him feed Norbert, who was now eating dead rats.
It bit me.
He said, showing his hand, which was wrapped in a bloody handkerchief.
I'm not going to be able to hold a quill for a week. I tell you, that dragon's the most horrible animal I've ever met. But the way Hagrid goes on about it, you'd think it was a fluffy little bunny rabbit. When it bit me, he told me off for frightening it. And when I left, he was singing a lullaby.
There was a tap at the dark window.
It's Hedwig,
said Harry, hurrying to let her in.
She'll have Charlie's answer.
The 3 of them put their heads together and read the note. Dear Ron, how are you? The letter. I'd be glad to take the Norwegian Witch back, but it won't be easy getting him here. I think the best thing will be to send him over with some friends of mine who are coming to visit me next week. Trouble is, they mustn't be seen carrying an illegal dragon. Could you get the Ridge back to the tallest tower at midnight on Saturday? They can meet you there and take him away while it's still dark. Send me an answer as soon as possible. Love, Charlie. They looked at one another.
We've got an invisibility cloak,
said Harry.
It shouldn't be too difficult. I think the cloak's big enough to cover 2 of us and Norbert.
It was a marvel, and that the other 2 agreed with him. Anything to get rid of Norbert and Malfoy. There was a hitch. By the next morning, Ron's bitten swollen to twice its usual size. He didn't know whether it was safe to go to Madame Pomfrey. Would she recognize a dragon bite? By that afternoon, though, he had no choice. The cut had turned a nasty shade of green. It looked as if Norbert's fangs were poisonous.
It's just my hand.
he whispered.
Although that feels like it's about to fall off. Malfoy told Madame Pomfrey he wanted to borrow one of my books so he could come and have a good laugh at me. He kept threatening to tell her what really bit me. I've told her it was a dog, but I don't think she believed me. I shouldn't have hit him at the Quidditch match. That's why he's doing this.
Harry and Hermione tried to calm Ron down. It'll all be over midnight on Saturday, said Hermione. But this didn't soothe Ron at all. On the contrary, he sat bolt upright and broke into a sweat.
Midnight on Saturday,
he said in a hoarse whisper.
Oh, no. I've just remembered. Charlie's letter was in that book Malfoy took. He's going to know we're getting rid of Norbert.
Harry and Hermione didn't get a chance to answer. Madame Pomfrey came over that moment and made them leave, saying Ron needed sleep.
It's too late to change the plan now.
Harry told Hermione.
We haven't got time to send Charlie another owl, and this could be our only chance to get rid of Norbert. We'll have to risk it. And we have got the invisibility cloak. Malfoy doesn't know about that.
They found Fang, the boarhound, sitting outside with a bangled tail. They bandaged tail when they went to tell Hagrid, who opened a window to talk to them.
I won't let you in, he puffed. Norbert's a tricky stage. Nothing I can't handle.
When they told him about Charlie's letter, his eyes filled with tears, although that might have been because Norbert had just bitten him on the leg.
It's all right. It's only me boot. Just playing. It's only a baby after all.
The baby banged its tail on the wall, making the windows rattle. Harry and Hermione walked back to the castle, feeling Saturday couldn't come quickly enough. They would have felt sorry for Hagrid when the time came for him to say goodbye to Norbert if they hadn't been so worried about what they had to do. It was very dark. It was a dark, cloudy night. They were a bit late arriving at Hagrid's hut because they had to wait for Peeves to get out of the way in the entrance hall, where he'd been playing tennis against the wall. Hagrid had Norbert packed and ready in a large crate.
He got lots of rats and some brandy for the journey, said Hagrid in a muffled voice, and I packed his teddy bear in case he gets lonely.
From inside the crate came rippled noises that sounded to Harry as though the teddy bear was having his head torn off.
Bye-bye, Norbert,
Hagrid sobbed as Harry and Hermione covered the crate with the invisibility cloak and stepped underneath it themselves.
Mummy'll never forget you.
How they managed to get the crate back up to the castle, they never knew. Midnight ticked nearer as they heaved Norbert up the marble staircase in the entrance hall and along the dark corridors. Up another staircase and then another. Even one of Harry's shortcuts didn't make work much easier.
Nearly there.
Harry panted as they reached the corridor beneath the tallest tower. Then a sudden movement ahead made them almost drop the crate. Forgetting that they were all invisible, they shrank to the shadows, staring at a dark outline of two people, grappling with each other 10 feet away. A lamp flared. Professor McGonagall, in a tartan bathrobe and her hairnet, had Malfoy by the ear.
Detention,
she shouted,
and 20 points from Slytherin, wandering around in the middle of the night. How dare you? You don't understand, Professor. Harry Potter's coming and he has a dragon. What utter rubbish! How dare you tell such lies? Come on, I shall see Professor Snape about you, Malfoy.
The steep spiral staircase up to the top of the tower seemed the easiest thing in the world after that. Not until they stepped out into the cold night air did they throw off the cloak. I'm glad to be able to breathe properly again. Hermione did sort of a jig. Malfoy's got detention. I could sing!
Don't,
Harry advised her.